Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Detonation. We have a candidate back. His name is Jonathan Shapke. Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. And the internet's better this time, so we're going to have a really good debate. We're going to have a really good discussion. Hopefully, there won't be any issues on that side. So, give us a quick overview of anything we might have missed in the last one because of internet issues, or anything you want to say or sum up about yourself. We know you're a nuclear physicist. We know you're
Nuclear
very much,
engineer.
yeah, sorry, engineer. Yeah, big engineering problems. We know you're running for president. We know that you like your freedom, your Austrian economics, your freedom-based econ. You know, so what else would you like to tell everybody and highlight as to your positions and who you are and your policy measures, etc. That we missed last time?
Well, I believe strongly that the most effective way to encourage growth in a in any field is to remove government from it as much as you can. The FDA has stifled growth in healthcare. The NRC has stifled growth in electricity. The Department of Energy has stifled growth in energy. Every time the government gets a hold of an industry, it stops. Not, barely pushes it past. No, it stops. When NASA formed, it stopped real innovation in rocketry for 30 years until NASA said, you know what, we're going to stop doing designing rockets. And then the free market took over, and we got, 3 different companies doing new rockets. And within 10 years, Elon Musk is landing a Falcon first stage and not throwing it away and letting it drop to the bottom of the ocean. So, and that drops, the biggest stage out of the rocketry cost because it's reused 3 or 4 times, and you reuse all those rocket engines 3 or 4 times instead of throwing them away every time, which, imagine if you had to throw away your car every time you went to the grocery store.
Yeah, yeah.
You wouldn't go to the grocery store with your car ever. It would be just insane. So the same thing applies in healthcare, which is where transhumanists are most focused, right? Healthcare and computer science and things like that. So what happens in healthcare? Well, your bureaucrats in the FDA suffer no loss when you've got somebody dying because a drug is not available, because it's still undergoing testing under these huge, long, cycles of testing. Those people die, and those deaths, if they're a terminal patient, they should have the choice to choose, and that's what Trump has started by allowing terminal patients to say, yeah, I want to try this. But every patient should have the right to try any drug at any time. It is their body. They should be able to ask their doctor, well, what are the risks? And if the doctor says, well, we don't know what the risks are, well, then they should, can take that into consideration. But, a lot of people are out there dying because they don't have access to a drug, which we later found out was good and healthy and useful for treating a situation. And those people died because they didn't have that drug. because the FDA kept them from having that drug by force. And, so you've got a third person who's not being impacted, making a decision about what you can put in your body. And that's callous at the worst. And if they're doing it knowingly, it's downright evil.
I like your slogan. It's free your immortality, because it sums up very nicely, encapsulates very nicely two big elements of your campaign. And one is freedom, and that's freedom from, and that means freedom from government. And the other one is immortality, which is right in line with sort of transhumanist credentials. And so I think your slogan is a well thought out slogan. How did you come to this slogan? Was it very natural and easy?
Oh, when I considered running for president under the transhumanist banner, it was a moment's thought about what I would run under. There was no doubt. I grew up reading science fiction and Asimov and Bradbury and Heinlein, and you read about one of Heinlein's works, Methuselah's Children. The premise is there's a group that started breeding people for long life in the late 19th century. And they, by the early 22nd century, have been successful to the point where their group, people are living 150-year lifespans when nobody else can live more than 90, right? And they are outed, and the public learns about them and gets really upset. Why are you keeping this from us? When actually it's nothing kept from them other than just genetics, right?
Mm.
And so they escape on a space station with a long-term nuclear drive to get to another planet, and they while they're gone, the rest of the people actually solve the immortality problem and figure out how to extend lifespan indefinitely. And when they get back, they find out that this has happened, and everybody's like, yeah, no problem. But how do you free that immortality? Well, you start off by taking away whatever barriers you can see are clearly there, right? And so if we take away the barriers to innovation in healthcare, if we take away the barriers to innovation in quality of life, right? There's people dying every year because their government keeps them from fully embracing the innovations that we already have to improve quality of life. They keep them from getting enough electricity. They keep it by policy. They keep them from getting enough food by policy. Well, most of the starvations that have happened in the last 50 years have been caused by a government keeping food from people. Okay.
Yes. So the question I guess everyone wants to know is, in the realm of all these, Manga, Mises, Hayek, Rothbard, and Hopper, these people, although they're all on the same side in agreeing freedom from, they all think conceptually a little bit differently about human nature. Now, what do you think about the base of human nature? Is human nature inherently good, inherently bad, selfish? collectivist, primitive. Where do you stand on the human nature question? Are humans rational beings, completely rational? How do you conceive of the collective majority of humans in the context of human nature?
Everybody has emotions. Everybody has their desires. Most people who are sane use what they understand about in order to avoid pain. Okay, more than they seek pleasure or seek even to fulfill this hierarchy of needs. No, they are avoiding pain, and they use whatever means they have at their disposal to avoid pain. This is why people commit suicide. They are trying to avoid pain. Okay. To the point where they end all the possibility of them ever experiencing pleasure, right? Because once you've committed suicide, there's no going back, right? So when you take that, okay, the megalomaniacs of the world were avoiding pain, right? Hitler was avoiding pain by killing the Jews. He thought that the Jews were causing pain to his country, and he wanted to avoid that. In the most evil way he could that ever happened, he wanted to avoid it, right? But that's what he was doing. He was trying to avoid pain to the German people as best as he understood, and he was really, really, really screwed up to do it, right? The Israelis erecting that wall around Gaza are avoiding pain, right? The people in wherever you talk about Somalia and the warlords, those warlords are trying to avoid pain, right? They saw the government in Mogadishu was causing pain, and they tried to avoid it by armed rebellion and plunged the whole country into chaos. And they thought that was less painful. And the funny thing is, if you look at Somalia's growth since the government collapsed, it is less painful. They have had better growth under anarchy and multiple fighting warlords than they had under their government. So those warlords were absolutely correct. That government was causing pain, and they were avoiding it by making it impossible to be governed. So it's crazy, but that's what people are doing. They are avoiding pain, and so that's why I think it's vitally important to provide for people's secular needs in a way that avoids causing them pain. And the truth of the matter is, taxing a poor person causes them pain, desperate pain. I remember when I had my first job, and I was earning $3.35 an hour, and I get my first paycheck, and they've taken out 20%. I didn't earn $3.35 an hour. I earned $2.70 an hour because they taken for the government. and that was a part-time job at the lowest wage that was possible to pay somebody without going to jail yourself. And So one of the party platform points is to remove the income tax, to remove the property tax, to remove, you can't stop smaller people from doing property tax and sales tax and things like that. But I guess you could pass a federal law against it, but it would be wrong to do if you ask me.
You can
But
abolish the IRS.
But yeah, because and then to fund things by taxing only the large corporations. Now that is actually a fully libertarian and anarchist thing to do, because those large corporations are limited liability corporations, and that is a benefit from the government. And so if we charge those people, not individually, but the corporate entity that is formed among those people, then we're charging a tax for a service. And we'd have, right now the federal government takes about 18% of the US GDP. And I think if we trim down the things that the federal government shouldn't be doing, that we can free from federal government controls. We can privatize the FDA. We can privatize the FDA. We can privatize the FCC. We can privatize even Social Security. Could be privatized. Privatize a lot of things that the government does nationally, right? CDC and things like that. I think it all even privatized, sold off, made into not even sold off, but made into a not-for-profit corporation that or for-profit corporation that takes its money involuntarily, and then does its service to those people who wish that service. And people would still want to have their meat inspected on a regular basis, and so they would still be looking for the FDA approval, and there's no reason the government has to be involved in that. There's no reason if you can validly swap that. If you can have multiple competing organizations. We've got, Consumer Reports, and there's, which, goes and checks out things. We've got the Underwriters Laboratory and competing organizations that also check out electrical devices for corporations for a fee. And the Underwriters Laboratory is not a not-for-profit. It's a for-profit company that everybody trusts because they value their reputation, and they know that if they ever pass as Underwriters Laboratory certified stuff that's going to burn people's houses down, they will lose that trust. And so there's no reason that we can't do the same level of freedom with the FDA, with the FCC, with the Department of Education. I mean, there's no reason that the Department of Education needs to be funded by taxes and then distributed by bureaucrats. That's the worst way to do anything. And as president, you have ultimate control over the regulations which implement the laws. You don't have to step back, and the Congress has a limited oversight on regulation. In the United States, if a regulation is approved by the organization, the agency, it's the congressional oversight is the ability to say, don't make this change, with a vote of Congress. Okay, they have to actually have a majority of Congress decide not to make the change in order to stop it. And so that's a significant barrier to preventing regulation change, right? It's very easy to change regulations because of this. It's very hard for Congress to actually get together enough to stop it. You look at the mess of partisanship in Congress, and it's a mess. I think the biggest thing that has hurt America over the last decade really is the rise in partisanship and outright racism, which is really sad to see, because you know, when I was growing up, racism was dying. It was dying on the vine because nobody was paying attention to whether a black person or a white person or a Hispanic person was doing whatever it was they were doing, right? So the opportunity was there for any type of person to do anything they wanted to do, and that's what I want to see in America. I want to see the merit of their ability determining how far somebody goes in life.
What about some of these arguments that people? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you can, but if you want to, you might want to shut the door because there's a lot of noise coming through. But in saying that, there's this argument on national security, for example. If you privatize the FDA, if you privatize the FCC, if you privatize the Department of Agriculture, if you kick Betsy DeVos out of the Department of Education and privatize it, what about national security? Won't foreign entities just buy up the entire of the United States, China or Turkey or the European Union or some other India or something? Wouldn't they just buy up the United States in a chunk, and then you would basically be beholden to a foreign country, which means that as president of the United States, which you took a constitutional oath to defend the Constitution and the people, you've reneged on that issue, on that promise, because all of a sudden you've sold it out to the highest bidder?
When you don't have a government monopoly grant, it doesn't matter, right? The problem is you're thinking government monopoly. You're thinking, well, how many, when if you change the Department of Education to a volunteer organization, well, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to take in money voluntarily and distribute it based upon whatever they want to do. If they want to keep with the current distribution that they're doing, that's fine. If they want to, make whatever rules for distribution they want, that's up to them. And if they don't do a distribution which pleases the people who are giving them money, the people will stop giving them money. I live in Missouri. When the University of Missouri started acting crazy and letting a Black Lives Matter protest go on in the courtyard of the university for weeks, and actually just supporting this when it was completely nonsensical. Well, they lost billions in donations every year since. Their donations went down by 30%, and they have had to scramble to try to to make up that shortfall. That's the sort of thing that happens in a free market when people are dissatisfied with what's going on. But the government funding is controlled by bureaucrats and by laws, and so they can't change it. The government, to change it, needs to pass a law to change it. And that means
So it's not this Adam Kokesh style of campaigning where you want to dismantle the whole federal government. You still want a federal government. You still want a Congress. You still want a Senate. You still want a system of laws. You still want the Constitution. You just don't agree with the bureaucratic the bureaucratic morass, the sort of bureaucratic sluggishness that's grown up, and you think along the Ron Paulian lines that a big axe to some of these bureaucracies in an efficient way will kickstart innovation across America.
Well, I'm running for president of the United States. If I was running, if I am an anarchist, or a voluntarist, and the government is force, and that is its purpose, is to govern using force in order to accomplish things. Now, but the Transhumanist Party has specifically got a platform which limits what we will use force on, and I wholly support that. And as president, I would take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and I would abide by that oath. I would take my Constitution, which I've got here available at a moment's notice, and I would say, does what we're doing in this department fulfill the Constitution? And if it didn't, I would say, well, then this department needs to change until it does, because that's my oath, is to take this document as the core and then apply the laws as understood and as appropriately described and interpreted by the
and that document is a very libertarian document. It's a very libertarian document. It's all based in freedom, almost anarchist in some ways. What do you think of democracy? Because democracy isn't embedded into that constitution. Hans von Hopper, for example, if you're a Mises guy, if you're a freedom-loving guy, Hans von Hopper, he wrote "Democracy, the God That Failed." What do you think of democracy?
Well, I grew up as an American, and I have seen democracy solve problems that were causing conflict. So democracy can solve conflict and can help reduce strife among peoples. I think the most the problem comes when you get democracy mixed with cronyism and people loose representation, like we have in America. The ability of each constituent to have access to their representative is supposed to be really good. It was originally one representative for every 20,000 people. Okay, with 20,000 people, a representative could really get in and get to know, if not everybody, enough people to get a feel for the group and be able to really and truly, you know, represent them. But when they said, well, we're going to cap the size of the House of Representatives to 435 and just adjust that, the number of people who are represented by each accordingly, it slowly turned away from that good representation into
Misrepresentation.
750,000 people. How can 750,000 people? How can you get access to the representative at all? Right? Kenneth, please don't throw things around. So you get a lot of dissociation, and the people no longer think of the representative as their representative. They think of him as, you know, a guy they might have voted for or might not have, even if, you know, and they don't feel they can actually accomplish anything. Actually, if you look at the Constitution, it says nothing about anything except a later amendment that senators are not are elected by popular vote in the states. Theoretically, a state could at this point still appoint representatives, I think.
We actually had an attorney, a constitutional lawyer on. We'll try and talk to that guy about it. He was very interesting.
Senators are supposed to be elected, but they made no amendment for the representatives. The representatives could still be appointed. You know, a state government could make the choice to appoint representatives based upon their allotment from the legislature. There's nothing stopping that because the Constitution is silent on exactly how you choose the representatives. It just says this is how the representatives will be apportioned among the states. What they should have been doing from the beginning is exactly that. And if they had done that, if they had never allowed the state, the actual election of anybody by the populace, if the states had said, this is not a democracy at the federal level. It isn't. It shouldn't be. And they had said, okay, we're going to just send our people from, you know, based upon who the legislators of the state decide. There would have been no question that it was a federation of states. And that is what has corrupted our government, is the notion that it is a democracy. And you know, once you got the what is it, 14th Amendment, I think, no, 15th. Once you got that in there, that the senators had to be elected by the people of the state, it started with these popularist ideas, and that's fine. That's what we have now, and but the states needed to recognize that what path they were going down when they started it, and from the beginning, when they started allowing elections instead of, you know, maintaining their right as the state to decide what to do about the federation of states government.
Yeah, because there was this general loss of traction in the freedom realm. So, they started off as fiercely independent, almost sovereign nations, and as they got subsumed and pulled into the federal government's orbit, they've lost a lot of that freedom over time. That's very true. Just very quickly, tell us what your feelings are in the electoral college while we're talking about voting and stuff. Just quickly tell us about that, because I want to talk to you more about mind uploading and other things.
Well, the Transhumanist Party's platform says that we will try to abolish the Electoral College. And so I'm not going to quibble with that policy.
But do you agree with that? You can have your own opinion on it. You can toe the party line, but you can have your own opinion. That's okay. Nobody's gonna.
Kenneth,
You got a fan.
Yes, he's my 3-year-old.
That's so cute. Kenneth, good name. Solid name.
So my feeling is that the Electoral College is a protection against the tyranny of of populace. Okay, and it is a protection against popularist government. And so I would hesitate to change it because it is designed as a compromise against just going with large populations deciding what entirely what happens.
Yeah, and
it's
you
a
hear
protection of the minority.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, this is the conservative / libertarian argument, because they're worried about just big populated states like California and Florida. I mean, not Florida, but like California and New York, just swamping and becoming representative of the whole of America, as opposed to some of these smaller states in the middle America. So you
It's the
usually
same reason that we have a Senate and a House of
exactly,
Representatives.
exactly, and you hear this exactly, yeah, and you hear it from the Democratic left leanings a lot, but it's usually they usually cork up about it more after they lose than than when they win. You know what I mean? So like when Obama was around, I never heard the Electoral College, but I'm hearing it all again. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, moving on. And I like that point, but if you're going to toe the party line as well, that's fine. I mean, but you definitely are allowed your own opinion on that. So don't be afraid to stand up for that.
Oh, I'm not afraid to have my own opinions on things.
That's very good, and we know that. So let's talk about mind uploading, because you're big on mind uploading. What's going on with mind uploading? Where do you computers or what?
Okay, right now we're still several orders of magnitude from where it would work. My calculations might not be perfect, but I figure about 10 to the 14th or 10 to the 15th cycles per second in order to actually even begin to simulate a brain, let alone be able to move it from a flesh and blood and brain into the computer, which would. So, even the supercomputers, I don't think have the proper type of processing. We've got petaflop computers now, or multiple teraflop, but I don't think that their structure is right. The funny thing is that the fastest computer in the world is in China, and nobody knows how to use it.
Yeah, it's the dragon something,
Uh,
right?
they don't know how to do that massively a parallel system, and it's going unused except by software that's been written in America already for
Mm.
massively parallel systems. Um, so AI and brain uploading are intertwined, right? The same uh, ability to allow connectivity and interconnectivity of small groups, right? Your brain is actually really organized into clusters of about 50 neurons. And how those in each cluster has its own little job, right? You've got a cluster of 100 neurons or so, which just recognizes vertical lines in this portion of your vision field, and that's how small the jobs are that are given to each of these little things. And so you cluster together 100 of those, and now you've got a cluster which recognizes vertical lines throughout your whole vision field. And you cluster that with the thing recognizing horizontal lines and things like that, and so you've got these little teeny neural net clusters, which are built into bigger and bigger levels of it, which make the emergent system, which is consciousness, out of it, right? Um, we, when you are talking about a Turing machine simulating that, uh, it's a very slow process, right? So even just to get um, human thought speed in a Turing machine, you're talking, tens of uh, uh, thousands of teraflops just to do it. And so it will happen, and if we can bring our brain into the computer world, there are two choices. One is to bridge that gap while the body is senescent, right? And then return to your flesh body after journeying in the cyber world, right? And then the other choice would be to clone into the cyber world. And those
Mm.
two choices would give you different results of what you want and what is considered a good result, right? If you clone into the cyber world, it doesn't have to be as perfect, right? It can, as long as it gets the flavor of who you are, you wouldn't really care if it remembered everything you've ever learned, right? Whereas if it's going to be coming back into your mind, and your mind, and then you need much more fidelity, right? So I think the cloning into the cyber world will happen decades, many decades before we feel confident in either in moving between cyber and flesh, if you will. I think people want to explore in the cyber world, but I don't think they want to give up um, their continuity in
Mm.
order to do it.
Mm.
Okay. So I see mind-machine interfaces as more probable for the conceivable next probably 50 years or at least.
Apart from running for the transhumanist party and that being a reason, why is mind uploading even? Why is it on the menu? Does it make you excited? Why is it a talking point? Why should people be excited, or why is it a thing? Why is mind uploading something that's something worth talking about, or looking forward to, or anything along the lines of advocacy?
Well, with the compactness of computers and their durability, right? If I upload my mind, if it has even a passing resemblance to who I am, right? Um, there's some sort of immortality there, if you will. That is the first stage in technical immortality. That being, that sentient computer, doesn't ever have to die. You provide it with electricity. Even if it loses electricity, the pattern is there, senescent until it gets electricity again. It is an immortal thing as long as it is backed up, right? So it is an immortality of a sort. And it would have the experience of just transferring to the computer one day, even if it wasn't very, if it didn't have much in the way of fidelity to the flesh and blood me, right? It would think of itself as Jonathan Shatke, and you know, it would recognize that it was in a computer and not, you know, flesh and blood and sinew and bone. And it would recognize that its limitations had changed, but it would think of itself as Jonathan Shatke, because that would be what happened. One day, you know, I went into the lab and I went to sleep on a table and I woke up in a computer. And then that computer is a lot cheaper to move from here to Alpha Centauri or Rigel or you know, some other you know, Epsilon Eridani or whatever, than it is to move a flesh and blood human by orders of magnitude. The life support for a human versus a computer is you know, orders of magnitude different.
And this is one of the arguments of why we need space travel. You know, some people say, well, you know, if we just get computers and we can just upload our mind on computers, we'll be safe. But it doesn't really work like that, in the fact that you still need humans and or robots and or a combination of humans and robots to keep the computers alive, to keep them powered, to keep them functioning, to keep them you know, up and running, to keep them maintained. For a while, especially in the realm of let's say energy. And this is why people talk about things like Dyson spheres, you know, sucking up the whole energy of the sun, you know, to power these super machines. You know, because in the short run, like Isaac Arthur was talking with Ben Zion about this, but Isaac Arthur, who runs a huge YouTube channel, Science and the Futurism with Isaac Arthur, named by his parents, I think, of Isaac Asimov, as he's told me. But he says, like, for example, Uranus will be the largest you know, stepping stone, like it'll be the largest supercomputer in the universe because it's so cold and it's so large that most of humanity will probably just end up hanging there while they beam this Dyson sphere energy to that planet, because it's cold and you can run supercomputers there. So, do you see a future for humanity even after the mind uploading saga begins, or do you just see everyone turning into a signal race and disappearing off as matter is converted into computation?
We're talking massive far future stuff here.
Yeah, we are.
I I think from where I'm sitting, right? From where I'm flesh, I'm blood, I'm mind in a physical meat package. I think by the time we've got the ability to upload our minds even into computers, we will also have robotics that are sophisticated enough to maintain those computers indefinitely. I don't think even now computer chip lines are mainly robotic. Computer design and manufacture is mainly robotic. Yeah, there's some aspects of it where a human does a better job, but if we're at the point where we're uploading human brains into computers, there's no reason that would have to be a flesh and blood human, right, to make those decisions. That and the truth of the matter is, I've done printed circuit design, and you give the computer a little more room to work with, and it can do well enough to do the job that you wouldn't have had to. And that was 20 years ago and 30 years ago that it could have still done it. And you give it another layer, another few inches of real estate after it's played out on its auto router, and then it goes, oh well, this is easy, now I can do this, and it finishes the job. So that's more expensive. That adds expense to the finished product, but so what if everything's done by robots? If you've got robots doing the mining, which is being done now, there are fully automated mines, where the entirety of the human staff is sitting in the maintenance shed and the office and watching the robots do their job on CCTV. And at the end of the day, the robots come in and they get tended to as they need to be, and in order to work for the next shift. And that's it. That's all that humans do on those mines. The robots are in there breaking up the rocks, pulling it out in robotic trucks, bringing it to the crushers, and then doing the leaching for the exact mineral that they're trying to get. And everything is being done by robot except telling the robots where to go next. And that's all the way up the chain if you want it to be. One of the reasons Americans are so productive is because of the capital expenditure, and that's what that is. That is capital expenditure in order to accomplish the task. And that's so once if a significant portion of people have transitioned to computer hardware instead of flesh and blood hardware, I see that as just a stepping stone. I don't see that as a transition away from humanity. There might be, because as a flesh and blood thing, I have testes, I have gonads, and I have an adrenal gland, and my stomach is sending out all these signals about what I need in order to keep the flesh and blood going. All of those things would go away, except in simulation in a computer body, right? So we might lose our emotional drives that I think are a strong part of being human by transitioning to computers. And I'm not sure what that would mean for humanity.
Yeah, you know, like the argument I say is that when people say, oh, you know, this is unhuman or unnatural. I mean, I feel like humans have always been adapting to their scenarios, whatever they are, and they've built this technology. And for me, it feels more like an inevitability of being human as opposed to something that we're building that isn't human. Humans wouldn't build this if it wasn't human to do. See, for example, fish aren't building supercomputers, so therefore it's not inevitable for fish to upload, because if we upload fish, well, that's different because they didn't build that, right? Well, monkeys or something. But humans, we've progressed to this.
Obviously, before we attempt to upload a human, we will have made sure that we can upload a mouse, a pig, right?
But that's not right. Like that's not natural for the mice, because the mice didn't go around building culture and building civilization and building pyramids and advancing to this stage. They would just happen to be in our labs, you know, unfortunately for them. But you know, but human
built deep thought.
yeah, yeah, that's funny. But yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like this is a sort of inevitable stage of humanity, and that it's actually humanity progressing and building on progress, not something. If it wasn't natural, then we wouldn't be having this conversation about mind uploading. That's what I'm trying to say. It's you know, if we were two, I don't know, if we were two ferrets, I mean, we wouldn't be talking about this. We'd be talking about something completely different in the ferret world, if you know what I mean. So you're talking about programming here. Why did you want to talk about programming? My question about programming is programming the new English, and will you have to learn it on the base level at school as a new English standard? But you can talk whatever you want about programming.
No, I just mentioned that's something I've done. I spent 20 years as a programmer, doing programming and analyst.
What language is Python?
Huh?
Python?
No. Decades before that, from the tightest assembler code in embedded systems, where you had a couple K worth of RAM and a few K worth of ROM, and you were trying to get a job done, to full-size enterprise level mainframe programming. To this day, I think United Airlines is still using some of my code for their stuff. Probably Sears is still using my code. So it's the type of stuff that is boring to do and boring to talk about. But even back in the 80s, I was working on with stuff with my boss on mind-machine interfacing, and we had a friend who had some issues talking, and we wanted to work on a mind-machine interface to, see what we could do about reading his electroencephalogram and interpreting that to speech with the voter. It was way beyond what the capabilities of the day were, but that's something that we're almost at. And there's the ability to interface, an artificial limb now that is just amazing from a programming standpoint, and from the standpoint of how difficult it is to really do.
There's something we can definitely agree on, and not that we haven't agreed on anything, but the machine interface, the biohacking industry is totally being slugged by too much bureaucracy, too much oversight. There should be a lot more freedom for people to choose to what they do with their own body in this context. I really want to get Tim Cannon on. Well, I had an interview with him, but I accidentally messed up the software. I lost the interview, but it's your body. People are allowed to choose to smoke if they want, or eat McDonald's if they want, or do what they want. Drink alcohol or do these bad things to their body. Take some drugs. In the United States, you're legalizing marijuana, but they're not allowed to experiment with chips or with interface, like different interface mechanisms, or upgrades.
Well, there are these poor unfortunates who get their mind messed up for some reason, and they think I shouldn't have two legs, or I shouldn't have two arms.
Oh, those people, yeah.
And they're
phantom limb syndrome.
Well, no, those are people. A phantom limb is a person who has, by reason of accident or sickness, lost a limb, and they.
Oh, that's the other way around.
They still have
the other way
the
around.
nerves reporting something going on, and it feels like it's their hand.
Yeah, the other way around.
It's these people have a body dysphoria.
Yeah.
Where they feel that they shouldn't really have an arm.
Yeah.
I don't understand that, but it's their arm. From a liberty standpoint, it is their body, and if they wish to,
what about
have that replaced by, a bionic arm, or that's their choice.
If the technology doesn't advance sufficiently, say for example they can't replace their bionic arm, their arm with a bionic arm because they don't want an arm, is there a cost to society there? So the government comes in and they says, no, you can't remove your arm because then you're going to want welfare and you're going to want disability pension because now you can't work and be productive in society. Is that a fair argument?
Well, if the government is providing disability payments, they have skin in the game, right? They've got skin in the game on these things. But if those disability systems are voluntary, what I want to do is move to a voluntary system of taking care of everybody in society. I want to move away from a government-headed, government-run, bureaucratic system to something a little, to something more free. If you look at the cost per person day of feeding and housing of a Salvation Army hostel versus a government facility, or even a government payment, it's orders of magnitude. the Salvation Army spends a couple dollars a day on those people. And yeah, you know, if you've ever been inside a Salvation Army barrack, it is a barracks. There's a bunch of beds and foot lockers and bedding in one big room in bunk beds. And when you go to eat, it's you line up and you know, it's as many people as fit into the room. It's, you know, 100 people at a time that get to line up and have food. And they, you know, it's cafeteria style. You don't have dignity. You don't have privacy. But dignity and privacy are, to my mind, privileges. You might, and I believe that it is appropriate to care for the physical needs of somebody, you know, housing and food, but I do not believe that my money or any third party's money should be extorted from them and then used indiscriminately to buy somebody else's quality of life so that they have dignity. Dignity is something you earn. Dignity, if you have that dignity without effort, then there's no reason for these people or for me to
The incentive is lost.
to push to get out of that situation. And if you have family and friends who aren't willing, you know, right now with welfare states, family and friends say, you've got welfare. Why should I help? What do I need to do when you have welfare? And they let the family bond go lax because there's the government providing, and that's not good. So if the families provided for dignified care for their families, that would be better. If the people who had no families had still care of some sort, but had to, you know, push for their own dignity, that would be better. The people who were capable of doing things would do things to get out of that situation. The people who, for one reason or another, because they are disabled or because they are elderly or because they are mentally ill, would still have care, but they wouldn't necessarily get that care at great expense to people who don't deserve to lose their own quality of life in order to provide quality of life for a third party.
All right, so let's as we're moving up to the end, let's talk about nuclear power, because this is something you know a lot about. And just talk generally about nuclear power. Then I want to bring you in on a debate going on down here in Australia.
Okay. First and foremost, modern life is built on electricity. You can look at the correlation between access to electricity and the ability to use electricity and the quality of life, happiness, and the per capita GDP. And it is almost a linear relationship. It's like a 0.8 correlation. And it only drops off at the top end because once you get to a certain point of around 8,000 kilowatt hours a year, more power is going not so much to making quality of life better, but more how many toys you have. You know, I have my goodness, it's probably 8 computers in this house. um, and and I don't need 8 computers, but I've got them, and you know they're here, and you know. But you know, once you've got air conditioning that keeps your house below 90, you're not going to die. Beyond that, it's comfort. And it's nice to have the house at 72 and never, you know, and, you know, but it's not going to kill you, right? To be at 90. So, but that extra, you know, 20 degrees is expensive. It costs money, and because heat transfer is by the delta T, and if your, you know, heat difference is 30 degrees instead of, you know, or in Celsius it would be 10C instead of 3, you've got a lot more heat transfer going. So yeah, you know, if you talk about that sort of thing, when you know the difference between a 0 cube, you know, no refrigeration, and a refrigerator that's 2 cubic feet is a lot bigger than the difference between a refrigerator that's 2 cubic feet, which we would call a mini fridge, and a full-size fridge with an attached freezer. That's a lot less of a jump than from no fridge to that first fridge, that first little pocket fridge. And that first little pocket fridge lets you store leftovers for a day or two. It lets you buy meat and not have to do it and use it that day. It lets you have eggs for months instead of you know, having to cook them within a couple days. It's a huge difference in your life to have that first refrigerator. It's a huge difference in your life to have that electric light that you can turn on in the evening to keep to let your kids do their homework. You know, that is a huge difference. And all the people in the third world don't have that. And nuclear is the cheapest power net on the planet. It is, there is nothing cheaper. Okay? The only places where nuclear is not cheaper than that is because they have a regulatory environment preventing it from being that cheap. Okay? Nuclear power here in the United States, even with the most stringent nuclear regulatory agency in the world, is still averaging 2.3 cents a kilowatt hour. That is cheaper than any other nuclear and any other power option that we have. And that's incredible. That's half the price of coal. That's even with low-priced gas, natural gas, from fracking boom that is just the craziest thing you've ever seen. It's comparable in price. Even wind and solar pretend to be that low, but not when you adjust for actual production. Nuclear produces throughout the world at an 85% capacity factor. And in America, it is over 90%. And wind, if you get 30% capacity factor out of your wind farm, you are doing amazing. And the places where you can do that are going away. And anybody who says differently is selling snake oil. And what's more, these wind and solar farms, and solar, even on the equator, you can't get more than 30% capacity factor. There's just no way, because that's how much the sun shines on that solar panel, and you can't do better than what the sun is when the sun is shining on it. It just can't happen. There is no other way. You have your rated capacity at noon on the straightest sun day of the year, and it drops off from there. And you can't get more than 30% capacity factor no matter what you do. It can't happen. So if they say, you know, this is how much it costs to install a kilowatt of nuclear, of solar, and it's cheaper than nuclear, you say, well, wait a second. You got to install 3 times as much. And then you got to figure out some way of providing power for the other 70% of the time. So you've got to put in a gas plant, is what they do. And it's a natural gas plant with solar occasionally providing. And then, well, then it's more expensive than nuclear. And that's just the facts. And then, and you know, I don't knock people for doing wind and solar, but they're not paying attention to the actual economics of it because they're following a dogma.
Yeah. This is some really good points here. I like this. You know, because solar, you know, unless you have good batteries, which are coming, but they're not here yet. Elon Musk is doing some work with batteries, Solar City and others. You end up overproducing at times that there's not peak hour. Your peak hour usually hits a different time to when they're producing, so there's no storage, there's no ability to store at night. You know, yeah, as you said, wind is intermittent. It's not exactly the most sustainable, you know, consistent source of energy. Coal, yes, it's okay, but it dirties the atmosphere and it produces a lot of dirt. What about why then are countries starting to reject nuclear power even after
Fukushima Daiichi.
Fukushima and Chernobyl? Like Germany, for example, has a lot of nuclear reactors, nuclear power, but it's phasing them out. It's been phasing them out for the last 5-6 years or something. And
well, there are people out there spreading outright lies. There's a gal who's a big anti-nuclear activist called Helen Caldicott, and she outright lies. She says nuclear reactors are bombs waiting to go off, and they're not. Okay. The most nuclear reactors can't explode no matter what you do. Okay. Even at Fukushima Daiichi. The nuclear part did not explode. The explosions there were hydrogen gas because they had used a metal in the fuel bundles, which undergoes a catalytic process, an autocatalytic process when it reaches 700 C with water. And it literally steals the oxygen out of the water and frees the hydrogen. It literally did that for the couple of tons worth of zirconium that made up the cladding for the fuel rods. And once it started, it generates heat doing that and makes it happen even faster. And that's why there were the explosions in the Fukushima Daiichi plant. And once it did that, the core system, the core stability was compromised. The actual way to have saved those plants, they had cooled long enough, right? Would have been to have completely drained the cores and taken all the water away. those plants were designed to be safe under a full loss of coolant accident, what's called a large break loss of coolant accident, and to maintain themselves safely. Okay, and that was their design basis. And if they had followed through and introduced that large break loss of coolant accident, they would have avoided the explosions. Isn't that weird?
Yeah,
That
it is weird.
And since then, the pouring more water into it has been the worst thing they did, and they shouldn't have bothered. Because once those reactors scrammed, and after the explosions melted down, there was no point putting any more water on it, because that core those systems were designed to take a full meltdown with no coolant. And there's no point in bothering to continue to attempt to do stuff that was already ameliorated in the design. And it was a foolish move, and they've been wasting a lot of money and a lot of time playing around with that plant that they didn't need to do. And it's sad. Just like the entire evacuation was completely unwarranted and a complete waste of money and time, and it killed people. They literally killed more people with the evacuation to try and prevent something that wasn't going to happen than died and ever will die from the actual accident. One person died because he was on a crane when the tsunami hit, and his crane collapsed. Nobody else died from Fukushima Daiichi, and no one else will.
But now it's a mess. But now it's
50 died. And that was the worst possible accident from a massive misuse of the facility. The worst possible accident, 50 people died. Coal kills more than that every month. Natural gas kills more than that every month. Solar kills more than that every year. Wind kills more than that every month in the wintertime. Because these people, have you ever seen what they have to do to an offshore wind farm in order to keep it running in the wintertime?
Not in the winter.
They go out with helicopters with flamethrowers in order to de-ice the blades. And they have to go up and maintain these motors 300 feet in the air, 100 meters up, and people fall when you do that. Anybody who's ever worked a high tower will tell you it is not something that you want to be doing, especially not in high winds. And yet, if you're going to keep these things from tearing themselves to shreds in high winds, if they seize, you have to go up there and lock it in place, and then fix what's seized, and then let it go again. And it's insane how much maintenance and expense is spent on keeping wind farms running. It's just crazy. And so nuclear, yes, it's a danger, but everything is dangerous. And it is safer than any other way of producing power.
Chernobyl is the one that really stands out in people's minds because they've got
and it should. I'm not downgrading what happened at Chernobyl.
That was about the nuclear rods, right? That was about the nuclear rods, the coolant rods becoming they cooled in a funny way where they couldn't put the rods back in, right? Is that they were left out too long, weren't they?
They were doing an experiment to test a safety system, which was supposed to generate power in case of a full system blackout and continue cooling the system. And their combination of instrumentation and the things they shut off in order to do this test led to voids forming in the reactor core, where the reactor core at Chernobyl and in the VVER line is fairly interesting. It's a graphite moderated, light water cooled pile. Okay, so graphite is a really cheap moderator. That's great, and it doesn't absorb neutrons to any degree, and so you get better neutron economy. They only had to use slightly enriched fuel at 2% enrichment, which is half of what the average enrichment is for a core in the U.S., right, in a light water reactor. But they made some design decisions. One of them was to coat the tips of the control rods that are supposed to shut down the reactor with carbon. So when they started inserting them, and they got those carbon tips got to the middle of the reactor, they pushed the reactivity up, because they went from they had gotten boiling water, which made it void and stopped some of the absorption, and then they put in these carbon tips as it was dropping, and it dropped kind of slow because it's trying to fill the water channel, right? It's trying to go through the water channel. And if you've ever tried to push your hand through water, it's a tough thing to do because the water has to take time to move out of the way. So what was happening is they were trying to drop these control rods, and as they got to the center of the pile, they increased the reactivity over prompt critical. And prompt critical is the point that they get to in a millisecond in a bomb. But in a reactor core, if you get prompt critical, it doesn't do a bomb because there's so much more mass, and it's so much larger than a bomb is. And so you get things overheating, right? One of the early prompt critical reactor failures was they were reassembling an early pile, and the guy was putting in the reactor control rod from the top, standing on the pile, and it's not going in right, and so he pulls it out, and the reactor goes prompt critical and blows another control rod through him and pins him to the ceiling of the reactor building. Because it generated steam underneath that, and that steam blew the like a steam rocket, blew the pin of the control rod right like a gun, and pinned him to the ceiling. And they didn't find him for days because that's where he was, up on the ceiling, and nobody was thinking to look up there. It was a mess. It killed everybody in the building, and but the same sort of thing happened at Chernobyl. It went prompt critical, boiled the water in these channels, blew all the control rods out the roof, and then melted down the core.
Understood.
And then, yeah, it's just a mess.
So, in other words, you understand the issues, the implications if it goes wrong, but you're still a nuclear bull. You're still a nuclear optimist.
Well, I believe I can make systems which are inherently fail-safe. I can make a temperature-limited core where, with a molten salt system, where the core itself cannot reach a higher temperature than what I design it for. If I want to design that to reach at maximum 1000 C, and that's well below the temperature limit of my materials, I can do that. And it will never get over 1000 C, because as it gets hotter, it loses reactivity. And when it reaches 1000 C, that is the maximum criticality temperature. It is at one.
So
that is.
There's a loss. There's a as it gets more critical, you actually tamper off the danger. Like it's a curve that looks like this.
Well, what happens is, if in a molten salt system, or rather any system, right?
Oh no.
You lose reactivity based upon the temperature because of something called Doppler effect. As your temperature goes up, the interaction.
All right, we might have lost. Yep.
I think we're still going.
Yeah.
So you lose to the Doppler effect some reactivity, because you have more capture in the resonance zones. Another thing that happens in a molten salt system is the fuel itself is density limited. As you get higher temperature, the density drops. So in the same volume, and that goes up, it has a higher coefficient of thermal expansion than your metals. Okay, so if I have a nickel box that I have filled with molten salt, as it gets hotter, less mass of molten salt fits inside. Okay, and so a simple drain at the top of it, and any extra goes down the side. Now I can even make a drain where, if it gets to a certain level in the core, that it does an Archimedes effect and siphons all of the fuel out, so that there's no fuel left in the core, and it goes to cool off automatically. And I can make that a system so that if it gets to a certain temperature, if somebody accidentally leaves the fill pump on and just keeps filling, well, then it gets to this level and it drains again, and then you fill again, and then drain again, and fill a drain, as many times as you have power to do, and be perfectly safe doing it.
All right, very cool. So,
yeah,
hopefully
my goal in nuclear technology is to simplify it to the point where it is has no moving parts and
foolproof.
No possibility of ever having a catastrophic failure, and I can do that based upon the physics of nuclear materials, the physics of the molten salts that I choose, and the physics of the system, which is really a cool idea.
It is. It's awesome. I mean, if we can get infinite energy, Australia's in that debate. We're embroiled in that debate now, nuclear or not. Maybe I should talk to some people and say, get Jonathan Chatke down here. to talk about some of his new safety procedures, because I've been for nuclear for as long as I can remember. It's simply because I've seen Europe do so well for so long, and the United States with
Oh, yeah.
nuclear apart since
If you
Chernobyl.
look at the price of power in Germany versus France, um,
Yeah, exactly.
it's 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 night and day.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
phenomenal.
France is still at around 11 centi euros per kilowatt hour. Germany is pushing 35, and that's not even cover all the different subsidies. It's crazy.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Germany is taking their energy wind, and Denmark and Norway are happily buying the extra power when the wind is high, and pumping up and filling up their reservoirs in the fjords, and then when the wind is low, selling the power back. it's,
Oh, that's
it's hilarious.
it is
and
hilarious.
and Germany is happily selling out the power at negative bids and then buying it back at these really high peak load bids. And it's and, and Norway and is just happily okay, and Denmark is happy to ship the power both ways.
I mean, if it works, it works. But I mean, they are looking to decommission a lot of that, and maybe something like the Jonathan Shatke nuclear revolution, can stimulate some more enthusiasm, or maybe give it to France or something. But anyway, uh, we'll wrap it up there, because I want to talk more nuclear with you, and I'll try and get you in on one of these other debates too, because we had a debate yesterday about a whole bunch of issues, and I want to bring you in on one of these cross candidate debates that we're having. So because it would have been good to have you yesterday on that debate. You've got a very
Well, thank you.
you've got well, no, you've got a very good perspective on things. I like you're a bit more free markety, yeah, which I enjoy. I like listening to that, because I'm a bit more leaning that way than someone say Ben Zion, but
Well,
or Kimberly
here's
Forsyth.
the thing. Even if we cut the federal government to zero, right? Cut it to zero tomorrow, we would have still a $21 trillion debt, and it would take 5 years spending every penny with no reduction in taxes, 5 years, providing no services, doing nothing at all on the federal level to retire that debt. And that's crazy. That is literally crazy.
It's not the debt. It's the debt is like one of these issues. It's complicated in the fact that it's not really there to pay off. Like you wouldn't have an economy without. You know what I mean? You wouldn't really have an economy without the debt. Like it's like your whole economy
what does
is.
the bank let you do in your debt to income ratio, right?
Well,
When you
Donald
have
Trump Donald Trump's answer to this is like when he did his real estate thing. He said, "If I've got $1 billion loan, who's more worried about it, me or the bank?" So if China, so that's his answer. He just says, "All right, let's just build up more and push more problems to China, not us, because we'll just never repay it." And China can take the shortfall of giving us all this free cash. So, there's some 4D chess for you. But
I think China held at peak around 4 trillion in
U.S.
U.S.
Treasuries, yeah.
debt. Yeah. Um,
But they're slowly not
couple
selling.
trillion is in IOMs from the federal government to the Social Security Administration, the so-called trust fund, which isn't a
A lot
fund
of
because it's
the
a
debt,
trust.
in the U.S. is interdepartmental debt. It's government owing itself a whole bunch of debt interdepartmentally. So, you've got to take that into consideration as well. So, anyway, I'm not the biggest debt concerned person, but I know it is.
What
There
you
is.
call your show Debt Nation.
Well, yeah. I mean, the tagline is "Imagine a world without debt," but it's because I don't believe debt is a very good mechanism for running society. But it's a tool. It's a tool. But I think, again, like you're saying, politicians mismanage huge amounts of debt and end up pulling resources out of the future, and that's not what I like. This mismanagement of debt in that way. I don't say that debt's a fundamentally bad thing. I don't say that debt's it shouldn't exist, like I do in my title, but it's more of this. It's more of this that we have to think about the future and think about future generations and this long-term thinking, instead of instead of pulling all these resources out of the future, so that once we get to the future, intergenerationally, there won't be anything there. It's not that debt in the short term is necessarily bad and stuff like that. It's more about intergenerational long-term planning as opposed to short-term planning.
Yeah. Every dollar spent by debt, right, is an attempt to shift resources to current spending from future spending.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you do that, you are betting that we need the stuff now more than then.
And sometimes it works. Sometimes building the Panama Canal is a good idea. You know what I mean? Sometimes building the bridges are a good idea. So it's not always, that isn't always a bad idea. Sometimes taking that mortgage out to get a house is a good idea for your longevity. It's not always a bad thing. But the politicians, when they're building, I don't know, nonchalant sort of big industrial, like I don't know, a super stadium, just another super stadium for no reason to please, I don't know, a couple of thousand constituents. Yeah, well, is that really the best?
The super stadiums, it's not the bridges that's the big problem.
No,
it's the foreign wars.
Yeah,
the new weapon system.
Yeah,
and the idea is, well, we certainly need the F-35 at a $500 billion. Research and development cost.
Isn't it $1 trillion plane?
Another 1,000 M1 Abrams because we only have 10,000 of them in the desert sitting idle.
Yeah, exactly. You've said it better than me. I don't know why I was going about super stadiums, but yeah, you've said it better than me. Yeah, there's a misallocation of resources there, and that's for prosperity to use, not yourself.
I would do everything I could to stop every bit of federal government funded R&D. If the world needs a super fighter, Lockheed Martin is certainly free to develop and try to sell a super fighter, and I'm not going to stop Lockheed Martin from doing that. But I don't think it's the proper place for the government.
But the internet,
R&D,
the internet was born out of government funding.
The internet was born not out of government funding. The internet was born out of a bunch of scientists saying, we've got to work together. How do we do that? Okay. And
Bletchley Park was well, I mean, yeah, okay, if you're looking at America, a bunch of universities.
Yes, it was called DARPANET, but the scientists who did it were solving a scientific problem. How do we work together? And that was all they wanted, and they didn't care that the government was funding it. It didn't matter. The government didn't really fund it. The scientists put it together with whatever they had available.
Yeah. The stupid internet's going again. All right, we'll call it Thank you very much, Jonathan Chackey, for coming on Detonation. We'll get back to you. We have so much to talk about, so much more to talk about in this, private versus public debate. So, funding debate. So thank you very much for coming on Detonation, and we will talk again. Thank you very much, Jonathan Chackey.